Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. What a day it's been. As a journalist, few things are more rewarding than reporting what we will today, but I'm sure you already know. India has made history. 1.4 billion Indians watched and celebrated as the Chandrayaan 3 landed on the south pole of the moon. And the world watched India's success. This day cements India's position as a space superpower. India's moon mission has opened a world of possibilities for science and humankind. It's a fantastic story of inspiration and of the aspirations of a country that was once shut out of the elite global space club. Chandrayaan 3 has no religion or caste, no political affiliation. It is India's achievement, a great unifier, a story of India's rise and pride. We'll tell you all about it. The other big headline that the world tracked today also featured India, the BRIC Summit. Not many takeaways given the different political priorities of its members. But did Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping meet on the sidelines? Their armies have been locked in a border standoff for 3 years. Will the weeks ahead see disengagement? We'll discuss that. In other news, Huawei is building a secret network of semiconductor chip factories. Japan is finally releasing radioactive water from the Fukushima plant. Pakistan saw high drama and a rescue operation involving a cable car. Zimbabwe is voting today. It's been led by the same party for 43 years. Will it see change now? And artworks created by artificial intelligence cannot be copyrighted, says a US court. We'll tell you more. The headlines first. Ukraine continues to target Russia's capital. A new drone strikes Moscow. Russia says its air defense is down 2 other Ukrainian drones in the region. It's the 6th consecutive night of aerial attacks. In May, Moscow shot down drones near the Kremlin. South Korea conducts civil defense drills, their first in 6 years. Air raid sirens heard across central Seoul. People were asked to head to underground shelters. The 20-minute drill was to prepare for a possible air attack by North Korea. In Thailand, Thaksin Shinawatra is moved to a hospital on his first night in prison. The former Prime Minister reportedly complained of chest pain and high blood pressure. He was jailed as soon as he landed in Bangkok yesterday. The 74-year-old was living in exile for 15 years. His homecoming coincided with his party returning to power. A railway bridge collapses in India's Mizoram state. At least 17 workers killed, several feared trapped. The bridge was under construction. 35 to 40 workers were present at the site when the incident occurred. And former Zimbabwe cricket captain Heath Streak reacts to rumours of his death. The 49-year-old speaks to Firstpost, says he's hurt and frustrated. Streak's former teammate, Henry Olonga, also tweeted about his demise, only to clarify later. It was called 15 minutes of pure terror, and indeed it was. But what came afterwards was worth it. Joy, pride and excitement. I don't need to tell you why, because India's Chandrayaan 3 mission has succeeded. As the ISRO chairman said, India is on the moon. All eyes were focused on the mission control room in Bengaluru. It was a room full of tense faces, politicians, bureaucrats, and the most terrified of the lot are scientists. They had been here before. In 2019, India was focused on a similar mission control room. We were waiting for Chandrayaan 2 to land. It was a heartbreaking moment for the whole country. But today, all that pain has been forgotten. I'll be honest though, the countdown was nerve-wracking. ISRO had a display of how far the module was from the moon, and with each minute, it kept dropping. 40 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers, and finally 0. The Vikram lander had successfully arrived on the moon. We were watching the scenes from the control room in our newsroom. The roar was deafening. I can only imagine what it was like inside that room, the tension, the expectation, and in the end, the elation. As we speak, India's Rover is driving around on the moon, and that too on the south pole of the moon. It's a historic first. We told you about this yesterday. No country has ever landed on this part of the moon. It's dark, it is tough terrain, and it's uncharted. But right now, India has a rover there. It's truly a proud moment in India's history. A big congratulations and thank you to all the scientists at ISRO. You have given us a great gift. It's also a tribute to ISRO's persistence. We were talking about a very complicated maneuver here. The Vikram lander was heading towards the moon at 6,000 kilometers per hour. 6,000, that's 10 times the speed of a plane. To land such a fast-moving object on the moon is not easy. Come to think about it, landing at such speeds on the Earth is not easy either, but the ISRO did it. And that too without $1 billion budget. The total spending on Chandrayaan 3 was $75 million. That's 5 times less than a Boeing 777. Two-thirds of the budget of Hollywood films like Gravity and Interstellar. It's a lesson on ingenuity. It's also an inspiration for the entire world. Space was considered the playground of the rich. The US and the Soviet Union had money to spare, so they took turns launching rockets. Others simply watched and admired. But India has shown it's not a rich boys' club. You don't need big, endless budgets to reach the moon. What you need is expertise, talent, and confidence, and ISRO has all three. Even before the landing, the world was all praises. Corporate leaders like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos said they were rooting for Chandrayaan 3. Even Pakistan was rooting for it. Their former information minister Fawad Chaudhry said, it's a great moment for mankind, for once we agree with him. In fact, he wanted the landing to be broadcast in Pakistan. Tells you how important this day is. And the journey makes it even more special. India's space mission has overcome countless obstacles. Sanctions, lack of resources, lack of political support, technical failures, launch issues. I could go on, but each obstacle made ISRO stronger. It made our scientists aim higher and higher. Today's landing is the result of their hard work. It's also the start of something bigger. India has plans to send astronauts to space by 2025, and who knows, maybe rovers on Mars. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's look at how Vikram the lander and Pragyaan the rover landed on the moon. Take a look at this.
The tension was palpable. Expectant faces peered at the giant screen in front of them. Complicated numbers danced around. ISRO's former chairman had called it 15 minutes of terror. He wasn't wrong. Thousands of kilometers away, India's lunar module was making its final descent. Destination: South Pole of the Moon. In 2019, India's second lunar mission had crashed here. Last week, a Russian module met the same fate. So the pressure was extra. With each second, the lander got closer. It was traveling at more than 6,000 kilometers per hour. To land from that speed isn't easy. It would take skill and precision. A few minutes past 6 p.m. Indian time, ISRO's mission control room exploded. Elated scientists screamed and hugged each other in relief. On the giant screen, Prime Minister Narendra Modi joined in. He waved an Indian flag from South Africa. The mission was accomplished. Vikram, the lander, had reached the South Pole.
Sir, we have achieved soft landing on the moon. India is on the moon.
Years of hard work led to this moment. Around 1,000 scientists and engineers worked on Chandrayaan 3. The total budget? Just over $75 million. But what ISRO lacked in funds, it made up with in ingenuity. For most people, the moon is an obsession. For scientists researching it, for business leaders wanting to colonize it, for parents singing lullabies about it. So, reaching the moon often becomes a national obsession. And India was no different. Chandrayaan 3 lifted off from Sriharikota on the 14th of July. Since then, Indians have been marking their calendar. August 23rd was D-Day. Millions of Indians tuned in to watch ISRO's live stream, around 8 million to be precise. As the lander touched down, celebrations began. Not just inside the control room, but across the country. The Prime Minister addressed the scientists afterwards. He said New India had witnessed a new flight.
India's successful moon mission is not just India's alone. This is a year in which the world is witnessing India's G20 presidency. Our approach of one Earth, one family, one future is resonating across the globe. This human-centric approach that we present and that we represent has been welcomed universally.
So, what's next for Chandrayaan 3? Vikram the lander isn't alone on the moon. Stored inside is Pragyan the rover. Both have a planned mission life of 1 lunar day. Here on Earth, that's around 2 weeks. The rover will drive around on the moon's surface. It'll send back crucial data to ISRO. Scientists are most excited about the prospect of water. Many believe the South Pole could be holding frozen water. If so, Pragyaan will find it. It'll also leave India's mark on the moon, quite literally. The rover's wheels carry the Indian emblem along with ISRO's logo. As it explores the moon's dark and mysterious South Pole, it'll also imprint these logos on the surface. The moon has no wind or erosion, so the prints will remain for a long time. Perhaps as long as the moon exists. It's a tribute to how far India's space program has come. From carrying satellites on bicycles, to being pinned down by sanctions, to landing and exploring the moon. But don't think the story is over. Today's landing is the beginning of another chapter in India's space story. ISRO Chairman S. Somnath alluded to it.
Honorable Prime Minister called me and conveyed his greetings to each one of you and your family for the wonderful work you did in ISRO. Thanks are to him for the support that he is giving to us for missions like Chandrayaan 3 and the missions that are in the offing. I think that's a great word of comfort that we are receiving for pursuing the inspirational work that we are doing for the nation. I want to tell you, and I want to thank you also for each and everyone who prayed with us in the last many days, who wanted this success to happen in ISRO. I thank all those people in all around the country and maybe beyond the country for their blessings and wishes and affection that he has given to each one of us for doing this work for the last so many years.
The world is lining up to congratulate India. NASA chief Bill Nelson extended his wishes. So did South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Maldivian President Ibrahim Soli. For many countries, this is a watershed moment. It proves the moon isn't a luxury trip. It doesn't need endless budgets. You can reach the moon with talent, skill, and confidence. ISRO displayed all three. Only 3 countries had landed on the moon until now: the United States, the erstwhile Soviet Union, and China. India's Pragyaan has now joined this elite club. So, what's next for ISRO? We could say the sky is the limit, but it's clearly not. India has plans to send astronauts into space. It's also planning another mission to Mars and a separate probe to the Sun. Exciting times if you follow ISRO. But today is all about soaking in the moment. The moon you hear about in poems and tales isn't unreachable anymore. It's the runway for India's rover.
The other big story tonight is the BRIC Summit. This year's summit had a lot of promise, but in the end it turned out to be like a packet of chips. Great packaging, but once you open it, what you get is a lot of air and very little substance. Although it had its moments, like this one. This is from earlier today. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was welcoming India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As they walk up, Modi spots the Indian flag on the floor. This was a mark for him to stand on. This is where he was supposed to stand for the photo. But instead of standing on it, the Prime Minister picked it up and put it in his pocket. The South African leader saw what happened and he did the same with his flag. Well, optics aside, what were the tangible outcomes? Let's start with China. Their contingent struggled. Beijing had big plans for BRICS this year. They wanted to fundamentally change the group, to add more members, to get a common currency, and more importantly, to take a tougher stand against the West. The Chinese president made a power play at BRICS.
We need to use the BRICS Plus cooperation well and accelerate the expansion process. Let more countries join the BRICS family, pool wisdom, and gather strength to make global governance more fair and reasonable.
But in the end, he generated more bad press. Yesterday, Xi Jinping suddenly went missing. He skipped an important event, the BRICS Business Forum. All other leaders were present. One by one, they delivered their statements. Even Vladimir Putin spoke. He was not there in person, but he joined the summit virtually. Xi Jinping was the only leader who did not attend. He was in South Africa, but he sent his commerce minister to deliver his speech. What do you think happened to Xi Jinping? He wasn't late to the event. Before the business forum, he was present at all engagements. He even showed up to receive an award, the Order of South Africa, the country's highest civilian order. He's on a state visit there. But for some reason, he decided to skip one event. No explanation given. Was he unhappy about something? Did he fall ill? Was there a pressing matter that needed his urgent attention? China won't say. It never does. Foreign minister goes missing, silence. President goes missing, silence. All you have is awkward Chinese diplomats giving standard answers. It happened again today when they were asked about Xi Jinping's disappearing act. They acted like it did not happen. Listen to this.
Yesterday afternoon, President Xi Jinping delivered a speech to the Business Forum.
Can you believe it? Even the text statement said the same, that Xi Jinping delivered the speech, except he did not. Wang Wentao, China's commerce minister, read out the remarks. It was basically a long rant full of anti-West rhetoric. The speech criticized the United States and defended China's economic policies. It said, and I'm quoting, "China is on the right side of history and hegemonism is not in China's DNA."
We have gained democratic independence through great hardship and sacrifice, and we have continued to explore a path of development that is in line with our own national conditions. All that we have done, in the final analysis, is to enable our people to lead a prosperous life. However, some countries, unwilling to give up their hegemonic position, have arbitrarily blocked and suppressed emerging market countries and developing countries.
China says it doesn't want a competition with the US. What it wants instead is a new world order with China at its center. And Russia has backed this position. Listen to what Russian President Vladimir Putin said.
I would like to point out that namely the aspiration to preserve this hegemony in the world, the aspiration of certain countries to preserve this hegemony has led to the severe crisis in Ukraine. First, the Western countries helped to commit an anti-constitutional coup in that country, and a war was unleashed against those who did not agree to this coup. A brutal war, a war of attrition which lasted for 8 years.
Both China and Russia are pushing for changes at BRICS. They want expansion. More members, more friendly countries means more clout. India and Brazil do not agree with this approach. They want to be selective on new members. Prime Minister Modi spoke about this today. He said there should be consensus before a new member is let in.
एक्सेलेंसी, भारत ब्रिक्स की सदस्यता में विस्तार का पूरा समर्थन करता है और इसमें कॉन्सेंसस के साथ आगे बढ़ने का स्वागत करता है। 2016 में भारत की अध्यक्षता के दौरान हमने ब्रिक्स को बिल्डिंग रिस्पॉन्सिव, इंक्लूसिव एंड कलेक्टिव सॉल्यूशन से परिभाषित किया था। 7 साल बाद हम कह सकते हैं कि ब्रिक्स विल बी ब्रेकिंग बैरियर्स, revitalizing economies, inspiring innovation, creating opportunities, and shaping the future.
What about the proposal on common currencies? The idea has some traction, but there are differences on the approach. China wants the BRICS to use the yuan. Brazil does not agree. Here's what their president, Lula da Silva, said.
The creation of a currency for trade and investment transactions between BRICS members increases our payment options and reduces our vulnerabilities.
So no consensus on a common currency either. China's proposals fell flat, but the host South Africa promised to keep the discussions going.
We are concerned that global financial and payment systems are increasingly being used as instruments of geopolitical contestation. Global economic recovery relies on predictable global payment systems and the smooth operating of banking, supply chains, trade, tourism, as well as financial flows.
So no major takeaways to write home about. That was the BRIC Summit for you, held hostage to different political priorities. A truce at the border with India will give China some breathing room. It will reduce tension. It will allow Beijing to focus on the bigger challenges that it faces, like their economy. The current downturn looks serious in China. Exports are down, real estate is in trouble, and millions are out of job. Even Huawei is struggling. The company has been a target of Western sanctions. Its access to raw materials remains restricted. So Huawei is taking some extreme measures. Reports say it has built a secret network to access some chips. The company is said to have set up secret facilities to fabricate semiconductor chips and avoid US sanctions. Our next report tells you more.
Huawei is back in the news for its backdoors. But this time, we're not talking about devices. The Chinese tech giant is now building a backdoor of a different kind. This one will help the company skirt international sanctions. Huawei is trying to get its hands on semiconductors or chips. They are the brain of modern-day devices. Huawei needs chips to make its devices, but it was blacklisted by the United States. So the company came up with a workaround. Last year, it made a move into chip production with Beijing's help. China armed Huawei with $30 billion in state funding. Where's the money going? It's being spent on a secret network of factories. Huawei is setting up chip-making facilities. The company has acquired 2 existing factories and is constructing 3 new facilities. But Huawei wants to keep these plans a secret. On paper, Huawei is not listed as the owner of these new plants. The facilities are being created by different companies. They don't share the same Huawei name. Neither does the tech giant own any shares. Reports say Huawei doesn't want to disclose its involvement. Again, the reason is Western sanctions. By hiding its name, Huawei might be able to circumvent the sanctions. Huawei is a blacklisted entity in the US, so American companies can't do business with them, they can't take orders or send supplies. So, Huawei has found a loophole. Get a company with a different name to make the orders. With this arrangement, Huawei can buy American chip-making equipment and other chip-making supplies. But before Huawei could go ahead, its plans came out in the open. Now, leading chip makers are raising an alarm. The Semiconductor Industry Association, or SIA, is concerned. It's drawing attention to Huawei's secret network. SIA represents the world's leading semiconductor companies, like America's Intel Corp, South Korea's Samsung, Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing, or TSMC, and the Netherlands' ASML Holding. These companies are building pressure on Washington. It might lead to stricter export controls, but that's unlikely to deter the likes of Huawei. China is making an ambitious push into chip making. Already, there are 23 fabrication facilities in China, and Beijing plans to build more. By 2030, China plans to invest over $100 billion towards chip making. In response, America is stepping up its own investments. US President Joe Biden has made chips his top priority and has promised to spend over $230 billion.
All over the country, semiconductor companies are investing in record billions of dollars. By the way, you know how much has been committed in the Chips and Science Act to be invested in America? $230 billion.
the race is truly underway. America and China are locking horns. Their contest could have two outcomes. Either it could lead to more tech innovations or make the market for chips more ugly.
Our next story is about free trade agreements or FTAs. They're considered panacea in the world of trade. You sign an FTA, your trade booms. But it turns out that's not always the case. India has signed around 13 free trade agreements with Australia, with the UAE and with ASEAN members, also with Japan. The idea is quite simple. When you sign FTAs, you reduce barriers to trade, like quotas or tariffs or duties, you reduce all of them. As a result, bilateral trade increases. Or that's the assumption. But in India, the recent trend is worrying. Let's look at the first half of 2023. That's January to June. India's overall exports declined by 8.1%. But India's exports to FTA partners declined by 18.2%. And this is worrying. In the first 6 months of 2022, FTA partners made up 30% of India's exports. This fell to 26% in the first half of this year. If your exports fall, your deficit widens, meaning you import more than you export. That's deficit. India's FTA deficit was $28 billion last year. This year, it's $30 billion. In other words, India's import bill from its FTA partners is $30 billion more than its export bill. ASEAN countries make up almost half of this deficit. This is a group of 10 countries in Southeast Asia, ASEAN. They make up about half of the deficit, so there is a huge trade imbalance. And the government realizes this. They've decided to review the free trade agreement with ASEAN. The review should be completed by 2025. But what explains this rising imbalance? One reason is global sluggishness. The World Trade Organization says global trade will grow by 1.7% this year. Last year, it was 2.7%. So trade has slowed down, and this is a global problem. But that alone does not explain India's situation. Our main problem is exports. Let me explain how this works. Around 18 items make up 75% of India's merchandise exports. Things like cereals, fruits and vegetables, textiles, spices, fish. India exported less of these goods in the first half of this year. Now, do you see the problem here? These are not all-weather exports. If the monsoon is bad, India may have to curb food exports. If inflation rises, same thing. We've already limited rice and wheat exports. And when that happens, the deficit widens. So what is the solution? To focus on more reliable sectors like telecom or computers or pharma. These items make up 25% of India's exports. And guess what? These exports grew in the first half of this year. So if the idea is to diversify your shipments away from agriculture, agro products are important, no two ways about it, but they cannot be your only driver. If they are, your trade deficit will keep widening. It was $191 billion in 2021. It increased to $267 billion last year. That's a rise of almost 40%. Now, I know what a lot of people will say. Oil prices were up. If you pay more for oil, your import bill will rise anyway, which is true. But other countries have figured out solutions. Take Japan, for instance. They registered a trade surplus in June this year. It was the first in 2 years, a trade surplus. Same with South Korea. They registered a surplus in June, their first in 15 months. And so did China. Their trade surplus last year was $877 billion. And all these countries import energy. Yet they posted surpluses. My point is, it is possible. India needs to strengthen its industrial base, attract more foreign investment. It's the only way to overcome this deficit. As for free trade agreements, it's a wake-up call. Simply signing them is not enough. We need to secure competitive terms. Now, India is currently involved in two major FTA talks. One is with Britain, the other is with the European Union, the EU. Both are very important trade partners, but more importantly, they're developed economies. So you need to negotiate harder, and I'll tell you why. Recently, the International Monetary Fund or the IMF warned against green protectionism. What does that mean? Western countries are using climate action to justify protectionism. For example, subsidies. The US recently passed a law to fight inflation. It's called the Inflation Reduction Act. This law gives subsidies worth $7,500 to people who buy electric cars. It's a great idea, right? Just one problem though. That car must have been assembled in North America. So EVs made in India or Japan or China or Vietnam have no chance. Why would customers just abandon thousands of dollars in subsidies? Europe has done something similar. In October, they will introduce a carbon tax. Say you import steel from India to Europe or aluminium from Africa. Now, these places have more relaxed laws on emissions. So Europe says you will have to pay a tax now, a tax for producing in and importing from the developing world. Now, imagine you're a producer. What would you do? You either pay the tax or you shift your company to Europe. Such policies are being called a new wave of protectionism. It would have a massive impact on India's exports. So two things to watch out for here: more industrial production and better negotiation at the trade table. And speaking of negotiation, the next decision was taken without any. It's as unilateral as they come. I'm talking about Japan. Their government is releasing radioactive water from Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean. The process will start tomorrow. It could take decades to be completed. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited the Fukushima plant this week. He took stock of the preparations.
TEPCO is asked to swiftly prepare to start the water discharge in accordance with the plan approved by the Nuclear Regulation Authority. As for the specific release date, it is expected to be August 24, weather and sea conditions permitting.
But Japan's neighbors are not happy, especially China. They're calling this a selfish move.
It is blatantly transferring the risk of nuclear contamination to the whole world and putting its own selfish interests above the long-term well-being of all humankind. This is extremely selfish and irresponsible. China is gravely concerned about it and strongly opposes it.
Maybe China is concerned, or maybe they're just getting even. Last week, Japan and South Korea held a trilateral summit in the US at Camp David. Joe Biden hosted it. They had some tough words for China. Beijing was called aggressive and dangerous, so maybe this is tit for tat. But let's keep the politics aside. Let's focus on the science and the public reaction. The Fukushima nuclear plant is located around 250 kilometers from Tokyo. In 2011, it was hit by an earthquake and tsunami. The reactors were badly damaged. 3 of them had a nuclear meltdown. So what did authorities do? They used vast amounts of water to cool down the reactors to stabilize them. This wastewater was radioactive. So instead of dumping it, Japan had to store it. How much water are we talking about here? Around 1.3 million metric tons. It's enough to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 500. This water is held inside 1,000 steel containers around the plant. Why is it being released now? Because Japan is running out of space. They need more water to completely decommission the plant. But for that, the existing wastewater must be dumped somewhere. How will they do it? The wastewater has already been treated. Most experts say it is not poisonous. It will be mixed with seawater and released into the ocean. Now, this water has just one radioactive isotope in it. It's called tritium. This isotope is pretty common. Even rainwater has it. So experts say the science checks out. The United Nations Atomic Watchdog has also signed off on it. They say the impact will be quote-unquote negligible. But tell that to the people. There are protests in China, in South Korea, in the Philippines and in Hong Kong. Fishermen in Japan are also protesting. Their logic is quite simple. If you release this water, no one will buy the fish. They will think it's poisonous. And it's hard to argue with that. The common man is not concerned about isotopes or tritium. They're concerned about the impact. Will it affect my life and business or not? That's all they care about. For many in Japan, the answer to those questions is yes.
I think it's unscientific at best to release it here, and it's sure to hurt sales of fish. That's why I'm strongly against it. I don't want them to do it.
I have some concerns about the Fukushima water release. If the government is really going to do it, I would like them to show more evidence that it won't have any effect on the environment.
I know it's too late now. Japan is all set to begin the release tomorrow. They have diluted some of the wastewater with seawater. If the weather permits, it will be released. So it's pointless to debate whether Japan should have done this or not. The science was solid, the reasons were justified, and the United Nations signed off. But how they did it is a different debate altogether. No consensus, no confidence building, no transparency. Surely there was a better way to do it. Japan could have spent more time and money building awareness, perhaps invite neighbors to see the ground reality, let them conduct tests. Instead, Japan decided to go it alone. One report from the UN watchdog is not enough. Such issues require more negotiations, more inspections. Only then can you build consensus. Japan did not bother with it. And as a result, they have set a bad example. What is stopping other countries from doing the same with nuclear wastewater? Well, after tomorrow, nothing. We're not saying Japan should store this water for eternity. We're saying build consensus. Maybe China would still have objected to the plan, but the fact is, we'll never know because Japan never tried. 12 years after the nuclear accident, Fukushima continues to teach us a lot on what not to do. And now on to Pakistan. Did you know that the country has a robust homemade cable car system? It was born out of necessity to reduce travel times in the hilly regions. These cable cars are often made of scrap metal. No one talks about the system. But yesterday, it was all over the headlines, all over the world. 8 people, including 6 children, were trapped in a cable car after its rope snapped. What was a daily ride to school turned into a life and death situation for these kids. They were left dangling over a ravine, their lives hanging in balance, waiting to be rescued. When we were tracking the story yesterday, it wasn't clear which way it would go. But we're happy to tell you that all 8 people are now safe. It was a dramatic rescue, to say the least. Our next report brings you all the details.
It started out as a normal day in Battagram, a city in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. These children were on their way to school. They were accompanied by 2 adults. They took the cable car. It was meant to be a short gondola trip, but soon turned into a life or death scenario. The cable car they were using was homemade. It's known by locals as the dolly. It's used widely in Pakistan's hilly regions. This one was travelling between the villages of Batangi and Jhangri. It's a distance of 4 hours by road, but on the cable car, it's just a matter of minutes. When the cable suddenly snapped, the dolly was making its 5th trip of the day. The group was left hanging in the air, dangling 900 feet over a ravine. With little to do, the children huddled together. Some drifted in and out of consciousness. They were crying for help, but this was in the middle of nowhere. Soon, residents alerted the authorities. They used the mosque loudspeakers. Hundreds gathered on both sides of the ravine. Even then, it took 4 hours for the first helicopter to reach, but the difficult part had just begun. The helicopters were battling strong winds. Plus, they had to make sure the blades were nowhere near the cable. They made many attempts to reach them, but nothing worked out. After hours, they were able to rescue 1 person, but the others remained stuck.
The military became helpless because the people inside the chairlift refused to be harnessed. They tried very hard to convince them for almost an hour. They had stopped the helicopter over the chairlift and were throwing ropes down to the stranded people, but those people refused to comply. One man tied himself up and he was rescued, but the others refused. So there was nothing they could do.
As night fell, the weather worsened, so the mission was cancelled. The helicopters were sent back. Children were still there. Their families were crying for their safety. Emotions were running high and time was running out. So the officials debated another option, zip-lining to the cable car.
The helicopters were coming and going. but they did not give us permission to make an effort at saving the kids. However, when evening set in, they said you can go ahead. They had rescued one child, 7 were still stranded. We started our operation and thank God we rescued all 7 of them. By the grace of Allah, all of them are fine.
All 8 of them have now been rescued. The successful mission reverberated across Pakistan. The country's caretaker Prime Minister praised the operation. But the incident has raised questions about the safety of these cable cars. They're very common in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Travelling from one place to another is usually difficult here because of the bad terrain, so these gondolas help save time. Affordability also makes them very popular. A one-way ride usually costs 10 Pakistani rupees, not even half a dollar. The biggest casualty of these low-cost rides is safety. These cable cars are usually made of scrap metal or discarded vans. They're built by the locals, often illegally. That doesn't exactly make them very safe. They lack proper maintenance. This isn't the first incident. There have been several others in the past. In December last year, 12 children were rescued from another cable car. That incident too took place in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Police say they check the lifts every month, but then how does a ride to your school become a matter of life and death repeatedly?
And now let's turn our attention to Zimbabwe. The South African nation of 15 million people went to polls today. For days now, the streets have been awash in bright colors in anticipation of the big clash. On one side, you have the incumbent president, Emmerson Mnangagwa. He was seen voting in his trademark scarf today. The president seems quite confident about winning a second term.
If I think I'm not going to take it, then I'll be foolish. Everyone who contests, if you're going to rest to win. And precisely is what I'm doing.
You saw his scarf, green, yellow and red, the colors of Zimbabwe's flag, and his party, the ZANU-PF. That stands for Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front. Bright shades of green, yellow and red are a standard at ZANU-PF rallies, and the 80-year-old leader is known to sport striking outfits in party colors. His biggest opponent is a man called Nelson Chamisa, 45 years old, leader of the Citizens Coalition for Change, also called the Triple C. Chamisa supporters are clad in bright yellow, unmistakable during their political rallies. The Triple C hopes to usher in an era of change.
Zimbabweans want to be led and ably led. From today onwards, on the 23rd, we are going to remove a ruler and put in place a leader so that there's happiness in Zimbabwe.
Chamisa and his supporters want a reset. They want to end the 43-year rule of the ZANU-PF. Quick history. Zimbabwe got independence from the British in the year 1980, and since then only one party has ruled the country, that is the ZANU-PF. They won Zimbabwe its independence. Their leader was Robert Mugabe, an autocrat, also the country's longest-serving president. Mugabe ruled with an iron grip until he was overthrown in a coup in 2017. That's when Zimbabwe's military took over, and they replaced Mugabe with his vice president, Mnangagwa. Then elections were held in 2018, and the former vice president, won, although by a razor-thin margin. That was the last election Zimbabwe saw. There were allegations of widespread rigging, voter intimidation and outright violence, basically the same template that was seen during the Mugabe years. Chamisa had disputed the results in court, but he was turned away. This time he says he won't allow the election to get stolen.
I told SADC that number one, Mr. Mnangagwa is not preparing to win, he's plotting to rig. I told SADC that he stole the election in 2018, but this time I will not accept to allow him to steal the election again.
But the decks are stacked against Chamisa, and he should well know. Zimbabwe's political system has been dominated by the ZANU-PF for decades. The party has strong ties with the military. It was the generals who propped up Mnangagwa after they ousted Mugabe in 2017. The ZANU-PF also controls the police forces. Opposition leaders have been arrested, political rallies have been banned, and Triple C supporters have reportedly faced intimidation. Now, Chamisa has been in politics since he was a student. He knows the drill. But he's hoping that Zimbabwe's economic woes will spur people to vote for change and to do so in large numbers, in enough numbers so that the result cannot be disputed. Because Zimbabwe is in dire economic straits. Its inflation rate is one of the highest in the world. Officially, it hit 175% this June. Unofficially, it's much higher. The country has seen hyperinflation before. It saw monthly inflation rates of almost 80 billion% in 2008. Yes, we've got the numbers right, 80 billion%. The country had even issued $100 trillion banknotes. It was then forced to scrap its currency. Thankfully, it hasn't come to that this time, not yet anyway, but inflation has been on the rise for years and the economy is in a shambles, partly due to Western sanctions on ZANU-PF officials. The US, the UK and Europe have sanctioned some people in power in Zimbabwe. The World Bank and the IMF have blacklisted the country. It is not eligible for loans. And this is due to the turmoil of the past decades and Zimbabwe's constant defaults in the past. All this has hurt the economy, and this, I must tell you, is a mineral-rich nation. Yet, it's one of the poorest in the world, and this backslide has taken place during the decades of ZANU-PF rule. So Chamisa believes that the time is ripe for change and that the people will vote for a better future.
Zvinhu zvakaoma mari kumabhengi chaiko kwakusina zvinhu zvachitotiomera kutengesa kuendesa vana kuchikoro
saka panapa
panapa ndasvika zvekuma past 8. Ndafamba zvakanaka ndinambotora nguva yakareba ndiri pana.
So will Zimbabwe finally get a fresh start, or will old problems continue to haunt the nation? Guess we'll find out in the next few days. And now let's talk about artificial intelligence. This technology has taken the world by storm thanks to its limitless bag of tricks. One command, and AI can produce recipes, plan your vacation and write computer code, whatever you want. But can it invent? Can artificial intelligence invent? You see, invention has always been considered a human feat. It's about eureka moments by humans like Thomas Edison or Da Vinci. But today the question is, can AI's creative genius join the ranks? Does it own the art it creates? A US judge disagrees. And this is a first of its kind verdict. It says artwork generated by artificial intelligence is not copyrightable. Only works with human authors can be copyrighted. What does this ruling mean for artists in general and Hollywood in particular? We ask because Hollywood has been on strike over AI. Is this verdict a win for them? Our next report tells you.
Do you remember this picture? It's a selfie of Naruto, a monkey in Indonesia. In 2011, he peered into an unattended camera, flashed a buck-toothed smile, and pressed the shutter button. Overnight, Naruto became an internet celebrity. But little did he know that soon he'd become part of a lengthy lawsuit. US court wars began over his selfie, on whether the monkey owned the rights to it. The court ruled that Naruto didn't. He couldn't be granted a copyright as animals don't qualify for protection. And that's the whole point of copyrights. Only works with human authors can receive them. We bring this case up because copyright court wars are making waves again. But now it's about artificial intelligence. The latest case comes from the US, where for the first time in the country, a court has ruled that AI-generated art cannot be copyrighted. The artwork in question is this. It's called A Recent Entrance to Paradise. It shows a scene of train tracks running through the countryside. It was created by a man named Stephen Thaler. But he didn't make it on his own. He created the artwork using an AI software. Then he demanded a copyright for it, saying that the computer system is the creator, and since Thaler is the machine's owner, he deserves a copyright. But the court disagrees, due to the absence of any human involvement in the work. This is part of the widespread discussion on AI copyright. Many say it should be allowed. After all, it's a human who uses AI as a tool. They say the two can't be separated.
I think these tools will unlock huge amounts of new creativity and exploration. I think it will allow people who don't have artistic talent to express their vision of creativity in ways that they otherwise couldn't.
Then there are others who disagree.
The basic problem I see for a democracy in photojournalism is that the images are no longer distinguishable. Is it real now? Is it not real?
At the end of the day, art created by AI is machine-made. It's not the work of a human. A human's creativity is not being put to test. This is also a key matter in the writers' protests in Hollywood right now, where fears are mounting of AI replacing writers.
It is a slippery slope into a very dangerous time and a real dystopia if big business corporations think that they can put human beings out of work and replace them with artificial intelligence. It's dangerous and it's without thinking or conscience.
AI is not human and AI cannot replace us.
Now with this ruling, striking writers may have received some relief. Studios won't be able to gain copyright for work produced by AI. And if they're planning to employ AI, the ruling will temper these ambitions. It's clear that AI isn't coming for artists and writers, as AI art can't replace human art, at least for now.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with South Africa. As we told you, the BRIC Summit is underway. During a photo op, each leader's spot to stand was marked with the flag of their respective country. Indian Prime Minister Modi made sure not to step on the tricolour. In fact, he picked it up and kept it in his pocket. Meanwhile, in China, a massive fire broke out in an office building in the city of Tianjin. More than 200 firefighters and 62 fire engines have been deployed to control the blaze. And a rocket was launched into the space from Kazakhstan. The aim is to restock the International Space Station with food and fuel. And finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1966, the Earth was photographed for the very first time from the Moon's orbit. The picture was transmitted back to Earth by the Lunar Orbiter 1. On that note, we're calling it a wrap. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Liftoff of the 85th Progress resupply mission to the International Space Station. Tower is clear. All first-stage engines operating normally according to the reports. There's the skirt jettisoning of the third stage.